Holbrook had its share of cowboys and rowdiness. It is said to have been wilder than Tombstone, and the town's origins and history are rich in wild tales and legends. In 1870, northeastern Arizona was isolated and barren. The only fertile land lay along the Little Colorado River. At the junction of the Little Colorado and the Rio Puerco was Horsehead Crossing, the best crossing for people traveling north and south. By 1876, Horsehead Crossing, an important stagecoach crossing, had a general store, a saloon, stage station, and corrals among a grove of old cottonwood trees. The railroad chose the town to serve as a railhead for supplies traveling south to Fort Apache. The depot was built in 1882, 2 miles west of Horsehead Crossing. Present-day Holbrook grew up around the new rail station. Today you can find this depot just south of the railroad tracks on Navajo Boulevard. In just 2 years, Holbrook grew to a population of around 200. It served as a distribution point for mail to the surrounding settlements. Livestock and freight were shipped out by the railroad in all directions. There were several stores and 3 saloons. In 1884, the Aztec Land and Cattle Company began. It had 40,000 head of cattle running from the New Mexico border to Flagstaff. The men tending the cattle were referred to as the Hash Knife Cowboys because their brand resembled the knife used by the chuck wagon cooks. Their main headquarters was located just west of Holbrook. The town inevitably attracted the cowboys, and trouble was unavoidable. The saloons did a landslide business, but the residents were terrified when the gang would shoot up the town, which happened quite often. Described by the old-timers, quote, "The Hash Knife Cowboys would gallop through Holbrook with guns blazing, yelling, 'Hide out the kids, the cowboys are in town.' They would shoot out the lights at dances and otherwise justify the wildest Western traditions. Many of the Hash Knife were said to be killers. Too often, a little fun in town resulted in fights and injuries and deaths. In 1886, it's said that 26 victims were buried. Resentment for the Hash Knife was high among the cattlemen who had previously ranched on their range. Rustling was very common, but convictions few because law and order was difficult to maintain, and the rustling was blamed on renegade Indians or Mexicans. Rustled cattle were shipped out by the carload. Holbrook during the 1880s developed into one of the toughest and most lawless towns in the country. Shooting brawls usually broke up dances and public gatherings, and at least several times each week, drunken cowboys or bad men galloped their horses through town, firing their six-shooters, shattering store windows, and wounding bystanders who were too slow to take cover. Not only was the town being ravaged by outlaws, but by 1886, this lawless element was also running wild in the surrounding countryside. A bitter cattle-sheep war was in progress to the southeast of Holbrook, a small-scale war between the Graham and Tewksbury factions. It was raging in Pleasant Valley in Tonto Basin to the south of Holbrook, and a wholesale rustlers campaign was in full swing on the cattle range near Holbrook. Many outlaws chased out of Texas by the Rangers came to the Holbrook area and hired out to the Hash Knife outfit under an assumed name. Possibly the most famous man in Holbrook's colorful past, depending on who you ask, was Commodore Perry Owens. His given name reflected his mother's love of history. He was born July 29, 1852, on the anniversary of Commodore Perry's victory on Lake Erie. When he was only 13, he ran away from his home in Indiana. He began working his way west on farms in Indiana and on both farms and ranches in Oklahoma and the Indian Territories. He came to Arizona in 1881 and was hired as the new foreman of the John Walker Ranch at Navajo Springs. During this period, Owens held important positions with other large cattle companies, including the job of range foreman for the Gus Zeiger outfit. In addition, he was employed to guard cavalry horses at Navajo Springs where Indians threatened to steal the mounts. Owens quickly remedied the situation by killing so many Indians that the Navajos, who repeatedly tried to shoot him, called him the Iron Man and actually thought he had a charmed life. They also believed that he had supernatural powers, that he was not human but a devil, and that it was impossible for a bullet to enter his body. Owens was said to have been a born horseman, never seen without his spurs and chaps. He had long yellow hair and twin .45s on his hips. These guns were his claim to fame, for he is reported to be a dead shot, shooting with either hand and often firing with deadly accuracy from the hip. He carried a Winchester repeater in his saddle scabbard. As he usually shot from the hip, he often got the drop on a man. His straw yellow hair, falling almost to his waist, gave Owens a singular appearance. He was of average height and had steel gray blue eyes. He was extremely sensitive about his hair as well as his two guns, and any derogatory remarks about either prompted a fight. However, since he was greatly respected, supposedly, no one who knew him made the mistake of making fun of his hair. Sometimes when hunting Indians, he left it streaming behind him as, quote, a standing invitation to the Navajos to come and get me if you can. The Pleasant Valley War and Tonto Basin threatened the whole area, and rustling was rampant. Many people of the county felt a fighting sheriff was needed, and Owens was elected to serve as the newly formed Apache County Sheriff in 1885. There were some that liked him and respected him, and there were some that didn't. There were many who feared him. Owens is best remembered in Arizona as the, quote, hero of Holbrook's gun battle. A man named Blevins, who had the alias of Andy Cooper, who was wanted by the law in Texas, moved into this area. He had been suspected sometime as being the leader of a gang of horse thieves and rustlers operating in northern Arizona. His father, referred to as Old Man Blevins, had recently been found dead. Andy was thought to have organized the band of rustlers when he moved to Arizona. Old Man Blevins had 6 or 7 sons, with Andy Cooper being the most audacious of any of the others. Apparently, pressure began to build up on Sheriff Owens to serve a warrant for horse stealing on Cooper. The officers of the Stock Growers Association protested long and loud to the county supervisors in St. John's about the failure of the sheriff to get busy. However, so many complaints about Owens' lack of action reached the supervisors that they finally determined to call the sheriff before them and question him on the subject of several unserved warrants. Naturally, it was a ticklish situation, and the board felt they had a sworn duty to perform, but none of them were eager to undertake the job. To their great surprise and great relief, Owens agreed to act soon. He explained that he had not served the warrants because he felt that Cooper would resist and it would end in the death of one or both of them. On September 4, 1887, Owens made the trip to Holbrook to serve the warrant and arrest Cooper at the home of the Blevins boy's widowed mother. Owens stopped at the drugstore owned by Frank Watron, the constable of Holbrook and Owens' deputy, and talked with Watron for a few minutes. Watron said later that when Owens told what he was going to do, that he offered to assist the sheriff either alone or with a posse. This help the sheriff refused. Owens reportedly said, "I don't want anyone hurt in this matter. I'll show them that I am not afraid." Owens then mounted his horse and rode over to the livery stable. He asked Sam Brown, the owner of the stable, where Cooper's horse was located, and Brown stated that he was in the yard in back of the stable. Owens then went into a small room that was used as an office, shut the door, and began to clean and oil his Winchester rifle. While Owens was still in the room, John Blevins, Cooper's brother, came and led Cooper's horse to the street and tied him to a cottonwood tree in front of the Blevins house. When Owens finished cleaning his rifle, he asked Sam Brown where the Blevins house was located. Sam told him it was down the block and this side of the blacksmith shop. About 4 p.m., Owens came out of the stable and walked with his Winchester in the bend of his left arm to the Blevins place. He stepped on the porch and knocked at the front door on the east side of the house. The Apache Critic stated that several eyewitnesses to the shooting said when Sheriff Owens knocked, Andy Cooper answered while John Blevins went to the door of the west front room. Cooper and Owens saluted each other. Owens said, quote, "I have a warrant for you, and I want you to come along with me." Cooper replied, "What warrant is it, Owens?" The sheriff answered, "The warrant for stealing horses." Cooper seemed to think for a few minutes, and Owens said, "Are you ready?" And was answered by Cooper, "In a few minutes." Owens said, "No, right away," then fired the ball from the Winchester, and Cooper fell to the floor. That no injustice be done to the sheriff, and in justification for the shooting, Mr. Owens stated later that Cooper refused to go, and they said, "No, I will not go," coupled with a movement to raise his six-shooter, which Cooper held in his right hand. Sheriff Owens stepped off the porch, turned as he did so to face the door of the west front room, and fired the second shot, which passed through the right shoulder of John Blevins. At this time, the sheriff retreated to the corner of Armbruster's blacksmith shop and caught Moss B. Roberts escaping through the east bedroom window, six-shooter in hand. Owens fired again, the bullet striking Moss B. Roberts in the left shoulder, the ball entering from behind, passing through his left lung, carrying away a part of the collarbone, and finally it buried itself in the spoke of a wagon. Roberts rounded the corner and entered the kitchen, where he fell in a heap and lay weltering in a pool of his own blood. After shooting Roberts, the sheriff stood in his last position for perhaps 10 seconds when Sam Blevins, a youth of about 15 years, rushed out, his mother running after him, through the same door in which Andy Cooper was killed, with Cooper's six-shooter in his hand. The boy and his mother were about 4 feet from the door. Seeing the sheriff, she screamed, grabbed hold of her son, and rushed for the door, but too late to save the life of the boy, as Owens' rifle fired again, and the boy fell dead in his mother's arms. All this took place in about 3 minutes. After firing his last shot, Sheriff Owens coolly threw his rifle across his left arm and walked back to the livery stable where he had left his saddle horse. As soon as the firing ceased, several citizens went to the house, where a horrible sight met their eyes. There were dead and wounded in every room, and blood all over the floor, doors, and walls. The agonizing groans of the wounded, the death rattle of the dying, mingled with the hysterical screams of the women, made a shocking and unforgettable scene. In addition to Mrs. Mary Blevins, the widow of Mart Blevins, and the mother of the Blevins boys, Eva Blevins, wife of one of the Blevins boys, and Mrs. Amanda Gladden, and her 9-year-old daughter, who was splattered with blood and gore, were all in the house that day. The coroner's jury cleared Owens in the death of Cooper and Sam Blevins. However, many persons say that the killing of young Blevins, practically in his mother's arms, always weighed heavily on the sheriff's conscience. Dry-eyed and grim, the mother testified briefly that the attack was unprovoked, that not a shot was fired from the house, that Sam Houston Blevins, the dead boy, was her son and was only 15 years of age. Cooper, Roberts, and John Blevins were wounded. Cooper died about midnight the same day. Roberts died several days later, and John Blevins recovered in 3 or 4 weeks from the shoulder wound he had received. The whole battle had occurred in a little less than 5 minutes. John Blevins was found guilty of assault with intent to murder Owens. He was given a 5-year sentence to the territorial prison in Yuma. However, he was pardoned by the governor before serving any of his sentence. At least one shot is reported to have come from the house because it struck and killed Cooper's horse, tied to the cottonwood tree in the street in front of the Blevins house. Who fired the shot? is still a question. Probably as a result of the Blevins fight controversy, Owens didn't seek re-election as Apache County Sheriff in 1888. Instead, he took a job with the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad as a guard for its passenger trains from Albuquerque to Seligman, Arizona. The memory of the Blevins shootout probably haunted Owens to his grave. He is said to have seen the ghosts of men he had killed before, and he died of paresis of the brain at age 66 in Seligman, Arizona on May 10th, 1919. The Blevins home still stands in Holbrook, only now as the Senior Citizens Center.